Picture this, a freight train stretches for blocks, squealing to a stop in the middle of a struggling neighborhood. Hours turn into days. Nobody comes to move it. People walk by, notice doors swinging open on boxcars, and curiosity takes over. Inside, not food, not clothing, but crates of sealed packages. Sometimes it's drugs, other times, guns. Lots of guns. In places already scarred by poverty and violence, the sudden arrival of these weapons is like throwing gasoline on a fire. Locals whisper, this wasn't an accident. For decades, communities across America have claimed this is no coincidence, that trains are being deliberately stopped in the hood as a form of social engineering, flooding neighborhoods with tools of chaos. And when residents come forward with their stories, they're often ignored, or worse, ridiculed. Is this an urban legend or evidence of a hidden plan to keep the entire communities destabilized? Today, we dig into the conspiracy that freight trains aren't just carrying cargo, they're carrying destruction. Trains break down, that's a fact of life. But where and how long is what raises suspicion. In Chicago, residents of Inglewood have pointed out the same phenomenon for years. Massive trains stalling for hours or even days in the middle of residential neighborhoods. And these weren't just trains carrying coal or lumber. In 2016, multiple residents claimed that one of these trains contained high-powered rifles, pistols, and ammunition. According to testimony gathered in community meetings, teenagers and young men broke into the cars and walked away with firearms. The violence in the neighborhood spiked shortly afterward. This story isn't unique to Chicago. In St. Louis, residents have long complained about trains breaking down in Northside neighborhoods, blocking traffic and sometimes carrying suspicious cargo. A man who identified himself only as Marcus told local radio in 2018, "They always break down here, not out by the suburbs, and somehow we always hear about people finding stuff they shouldn't inside those cars. Is this a coincidence? Maybe, but to those living in these communities, the pattern is obvious." Let's dive deeper into Chicago. In 2014, community leaders began noticing a trend. Trains left sitting unattended, often near 63rd and other parts of Inglewood. Residents claimed that boxcars had been broken into, revealing weapons. One man who went by D for safety claimed in a 2015 YouTube interview, "We opened that train up, it was stacked, new guns in boxes. I ain't talking one or two pieces, I'm talking crates. We took them. Everybody took them. Next thing you know, the whole block had weapons we had never seen before. Like they wanted us to find them." Another testimony came from a woman named Shonda who told Vice in an interview, "Every time something like this happens, nobody listens. They say we're making it up. But I saw kids with guns that week, guns they never had before. I know where they came from. They came off that train." Were these people silenced? Not officially, but their claims were dismissed. Chicago police and railroad companies denied wrongdoing, saying the trains were victims of theft. But to residents, the denial sounded hollow. Here's the strange part. This wasn't the only time. In 2016, another wave of reports emerged, this time after a train full of semi-automatic rifles was looted. Chicago Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson called the situation suspicious, admitting it was unusual for such shipments to be left exposed in violent neighborhoods. So why did it keep happening? Chicago may be the most famous case, but St. Louis has its own dark whispers. In 2017, a man named Terrence, who lived in North St. Louis, claimed on a podcast that he and his friends once broke into a stalled train and discovered bags of narcotics. "I ain't no angel," he admitted. "We sold some of it, but the thing that stuck with me was, why was that train just sitting there? Why here? They could have moved it anywhere else." When asked later if he was worried about speaking out, Terrence said, "People don't believe us anyway. They call us conspiracy theorists. That's how they silence us." Another testimony shared on Reddit in 2020 described a similar event. "I grew up in St. Louis, and I'll never forget the summer the trains kept breaking down on our block. People found guns in there, Cops acted like it was no big deal, but I swear it was on purpose. They wanted us to take them. Whether these are isolated incidents or evidence of a larger pattern, the effect is undeniable. So here's the theory. The breakdowns aren't accidents, they're staged. Trains are intentionally left in vulnerable neighborhoods with cargo that fuels violence. Guns, drugs, contraband. Why? Conspiracy believers argue it's about controlled chaos. They can keep poor communities destabilized, increase crime and violence, and justify heavy policing, surveillance, and incarceration. Also create cycles of poverty that benefit industries like private prisons, weapons manufacturers, and even politicians. It's the same playbook people accused the government of using during the crack epidemic of the 1980s. Back then, whistleblowers claimed drugs were allowed or even helped into communities of color to destabilize them. Now, the theory says trains are the new delivery system. So what happens when people come forward? Most testimonies are brushed aside as rumor or exaggeration. Journalists who cover the issue often frame it as local lore or urban legend. But some residents insist that those who speak too loudly get visits. Shonda, the Chicago woman we mentioned earlier, claimed, "After I spoke at the community meeting, a man in a suit showed up at my door. He told me not to spread lies. I never saw him again. Paranoid? Or was someone really watching?" Meanwhile, activists who raise the issue in city council meetings are often met with silence. It's not that they're thrown in jail, it's more subtle. They're ignored, laughed off, or dismissed as conspiracy theorists. And in today's world, sometimes being discredited is just as effective as being silenced. The idea isn't as crazy as it sounds. History is full of examples where marginalized communities were destabilized through shady practices. Remember the Tuskegee experiments? The alleged CIA involvement in smuggling cocaine during the 1980s? The introduction of cheap liquor stores and fast food chains saturating poor neighborhoods. If powerful groups benefited from keeping communities weak before, why wouldn't the same be true now? For conspiracy believers, the train breakdowns are just the latest chapter in a long history of systemic sabotage. Regardless of whether the conspiracy is true, the results are tragic.